Welcome back to Forgotten Fronts, where we bring to life the untold stories and defining moments of war. In today's episode, we explore one of the most infamous battles of the First World War, the Battle of the Somme. Fought in 1916 along the Western Front, the Somme has become a symbol of both unimaginable sacrifice and military innovation. Known as one of the bloodiest battles in human history, it marked the first time tanks rolled onto the battlefield. Yet it also revealed the devastating human cost of trench warfare and outdated tactics against modern weapons. By the end of this video, you'll understand how the battle began, the horror soldiers faced on both sides, and why the Somme remains etched in history as a tragedy of staggering proportions. So let's step back into 1916, to the fields of northern France, where the thunder of artillery shook the earth and hundreds of thousands marched into history. The Battle of the Somme did not appear suddenly out of nowhere. By 1916, the war on the Western Front had dragged on for nearly 2 years. Both the Allies and the Germans were locked in a stalemate, each side dug into deep trench systems stretching from the North Sea to Switzerland. Casualties had already been enormous, yet neither side could deliver a decisive blow. In late 1915, the Allies had agreed on a plan, a joint offensive along the River Somme, where British and French armies would attack side by side. The goal was simple in theory: break through the German lines, destroy their defenses, and finally force a shift in the war. But as 1916 began, the situation changed. The Germans struck first, launching their massive assault on Verdun in February. France was forced to divert men and resources to defend that critical fortress city. That left the Somme offensive to be led mainly by the British, many of whose soldiers were newly trained volunteers from Kitchener's army, eager but inexperienced. The commander of the British forces, General Sir Douglas Haig, believed a massive artillery bombardment could shatter the German defenses. For a week before the battle, over 1.5 million shells were fired at German positions. The thunder of guns could be heard miles away. Haig and his generals were convinced this would annihilate enemy barbed wire, trenches, and machine gun nests, leaving little resistance when the infantry advanced. But there was a problem. Much of the artillery ammunition was poorly made, and many shells failed to explode. Worse still, the German defenses were far stronger than the British realized. Deep dugouts had been built into the chalk hills, where soldiers could wait safely out of reach of the bombardment. When the shelling stopped, the Germans simply climbed back up with their machine guns ready. On the morning of July 1st, 1916, whistles blew all along the British lines. At 7:30 a.m., tens of thousands of soldiers went over the top, climbing out of their trenches and advancing in lines across no man's land. They expected little resistance. Instead, German machine guns opened fire almost immediately. Whole battalions were cut down in minutes. In some areas, the barbed wire had not even been touched by the bombardment, forcing soldiers to bunch together as they tried to find gaps. This made them even easier targets. By nightfall, the scale of the disaster was clear. On that single day, the British suffered almost 60,000 casualties, including 20,000 dead. It remains the bloodiest day in British military history. Yet despite the losses, Haig and the Allied command pressed on. The Somme offensive had begun, and there was no turning back. The battle was supposed to bring a breakthrough. Instead, it turned into a grinding war of attrition, fought yard by yard over shattered ground. After the disastrous opening day, the Battle of the Somme settled into a brutal pattern. For weeks, the Allies launched repeated attacks along the front. The objectives were modest: capture a village, a ridge, or even just a trench line. Yet every gain came at enormous cost. The battlefield itself was a nightmare. The rolling countryside of northern France was reduced to a wasteland of craters, mud, and broken trees. Entire villages were obliterated, leaving only rubble. Shellfire was constant, filling the air with choking smoke and dust. Soldiers lived under the roar of artillery, never knowing if the next shell would be their last. Trench warfare at the Somme was a test of endurance. Soldiers waded through mud that could swallow boots, sometimes even men. Rats fed on the dead and crawled over the living. Lice spread through uniforms. Waterlogged trenches stank of decay, and the cries of the wounded often echoed through the night. Letters from survivors described the Somme as a place of endless noise, filth, and fear. German defenses remained formidable. Machine guns were everywhere, and well-placed artillery barrages cut down attackers as they tried to cross no man's land. Gas attacks were used, adding another layer of terror. The British, despite their sacrifices, often advanced only a few hundred yards before being forced back. Still, the Allies kept pushing. One of the most famous moments came in September 1916, when a new weapon was introduced: the tank. Clumsy and slow, these armored beasts rumbled across the battlefield, crushing barbed wire and terrifying German soldiers who had never seen such machines. But early tanks broke down frequently, and there were too few to make a decisive impact. Meanwhile, the French, though heavily engaged at Verdun, continued to support the offensive in the south. Their troops, more experienced than many of the British volunteers, made steady but limited gains. Yet the overall battle remained a stalemate of attrition. For soldiers, each day was a matter of survival. They lived in constant danger, yet also endured boredom between attacks. Some tried to keep spirits up with songs, jokes, or small comforts like tea. Others fell into despair, haunted by the endless losses. As one British soldier wrote, "The shells never cease, the dead never stop coming. We advance, we fall, and the land swallows us." By autumn, the Somme had become a symbol of futility. Tens of thousands of men had died, and the front lines had barely shifted. Yet still, the battle went on. As summer turned to autumn, the Battle of the Somme dragged on. The weather grew colder, the ground muddier, and the soldiers ever more exhausted. Both sides threw reinforcements into the fight, determined not to give way. In October, the Allies renewed their assaults, this time with more tanks and better coordination between artillery and infantry. They introduced new tactics like the creeping barrage, where artillery fire moved forward just ahead of advancing troops, trying to shield them from enemy guns. These were early signs of the more modern warfare to come. Yet progress remained slow. Villages such as Thiepval, Flers, and Courcelette became names of bitter struggle, changing hands only after weeks of fighting. Casualties mounted relentlessly. German soldiers fought stubbornly from fortified positions, while British and French commanders remained committed to grinding down the enemy. By November 1916, the weather turned against both sides. Heavy rain turned the battlefield into a swamp of mud and water-filled craters. Movement became almost impossible, and disease spread among the troops. Finally, on November 18th, the Allies called an end to the offensive. The results were staggering. In 4.5 months of fighting, the Allies gained just 6 miles of ground. Casualties on both sides exceeded 1 million men. The British alone suffered around 420,000 casualties, the French about 200,000, and the Germans an estimated 465,000. The Battle of the Somme failed to achieve a breakthrough, But it did have consequences. It relieved pressure on the French at Verdun, where Germany had hoped to bleed France dry. It also forced the Germans to reconsider their tactics, leading them to build even deeper defensive systems. For the British Army, it was a terrible baptism of fire, but also a learning experience. New tactics, improved artillery use, and the first use of tanks were lessons that would shape the final years of the war. The legacy of the Somme, however, is one of loss. The names of July 1st and the Somme battlefield became etched into the memory of nations. For Britain and its dominions, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and others, the Somme symbolized both sacrifice and futility. Memorials now stand where villages once lay, and cemeteries stretch for miles, silent reminders of the price paid. The Somme remains a haunting chapter of the First World War, a battle that promised victory but delivered only grief, teaching the world a grim lesson about the human cost of modern war. The Battle of the Somme was not a single clash, but a grinding ordeal lasting over 4 months. By its end, more than 1 million men were killed or wounded. For Britain, it became a national trauma. For France, it was a relief that the pressure at Verdun eased. For Germany, it was proof that even victories came at devastating cost. Yet the Somme also marked the dawn of modern warfare. Tanks, creeping artillery barrages, and new tactics born from necessity began to change the face of war. It was a tragedy, but also a turning point. Thank you for watching Forgotten Fronts. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, share, and comment your thoughts below. Which moment of the Somme shocked you most? And of course, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the hidden and forgotten battles of history. Until next time, remember the lessons of the past and those who paid the ultimate price.